Hello everyone, Redbeard here, back at it again, and today I finally bring you my Thrones of Decay DLC predictions. Apologies it took so long, I had to remake the entire video for quality purposes, and life gets busy. But I would be highly surprised if the legendary lords for this DLC were not Tamarkan, Elspeth von Draken, and Grim Berlichson. Now, the Tamarkan vs. Elspeth rivalry is a long-anticipated DLC, so that the fact that Nurgle and the Empire will be pitted together pretty much ensures that those are the two lords that are coming. And Grim Berlichson, we are long awaiting an engineer-focused DLC for the dwarves as well, so this makes a whole bunch of sense. Malachi Mackison as the mentioned free legendary lord, with the hint of you have everything in the toolbox that you need to guess the hero. Malachi Mackison is a very famous engineer, a Slayer engineer at that created the Thunder Barge, the Goblin Hewer, amongst other inventions that we expect to see as units. So he does not make any sense as a legendary lord since he is a Slayer engineer, so very much an outcast. So Grim Berlichson is our option for the engineer lord. Now, Elspeth von Draken is important to come as this DLC because we are highly expecting generic wizard lords as well. And, I mean, she's just a very cool character with her Carmine Dragon, and she is the most powerful spellcaster, I believe, in the Empire. Tamarkan is also much anticipated, mostly because of his toad dragon mount, but he also brings along with him a series of units that will help bolster the Nurgle roster, such as Rot Knights. Now, speaking of Rot Knights, Case the Befouled and Theodore Bruckner, I don't think should actually be the legendary hero that is advertised with the pack. I think a more broad hero is in need for that. But I can't imagine Tamarkan without Case the Befouled and Theodore Bruckner, or Elspeth without Theodore. So I think of Case and Theodore as similar to Gorich for Throth the Unclean, or Henley la Massif for Rapunzel de Leres. They are an unadvertised legendary hero, they just happen to come with that character. As in, they won't come for the whole race, they'll just start with that character. So, again, Kaisk and Theodore, I think, should be in this DLC, technically, but not advertised. I think the character that the advertised legendary hero should maybe be is Vultan. Now, Vultan might make sense more alongside a Mid-Inland DLC. I could also mention a ton of other Empire characters. I think Empire should be the most character-heavy, but we will get into that with the next video on the Empire. So, Kais the Befouled is a Rot Knight, so he would help, along with Tamarkan, bring in Rot Beasts, so Nurgle would get a monstrous cavalry, so that to help fill out the war bands, which I expect a cavalry for Nurgle and Slaanesh to fill out the war bands, and an aspiring champion unit for each monogod, maybe a monstrous cavalry option as well, or perhaps a legendary unit. We need to see for the monogods that the upgrades get their top tier units, and I think they very much left those open for DLC. Kaisk the Befouled may also work as a Warriors of Chaos legendary hero, possibly available to that race. But mostly I think Tamarkan should just start with him, and he would boost up your cavalry in particular, but maybe other Warriors of Chaos Nurgle units as well. Theodore Bruckner, again, I cannot imagine Elspeth without him. Theodore was basically her bodyguard, a very stout warrior who rode perhaps the most giant demigryph mount in the Empire, and Elspeth used Theodore, who willingly sacrificed himself, to defeat Tamercan. She gave him, I believe it was an amulet, that when activated would basically suck Theodore and whoever was close to him into this black hole to most likely never be seen again. So Theodore he was the only one that could get close enough to Tamercan. Elspeth knew this, and so did Theodore. So they came up with a plan where Theodore brought the artifact as close as he could to Tamercan, and then Elspeth, flying overhead, waited for the right moment, and then activated. And then Tamercan and Theodore, unfortunately, were no more. So again, Elspeth without Theodore just feels wrong for me. So again, Kaisk the Befouled, Theodore Bruckner, I think they should be unadvertised with the characters. Now, besides other Empire characters, let's save that for next video, and then let's look at Nurgle characters. So firstly, let's address the elephant in the room. Horticulous Slimux is an Age of Sigmar and a 40k character. Now, he's already made the crossover, so he's not an exclusive character, let's say like Chartor. He is not that, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, if there is any race that deserves crossover in Total War, it is the Demons of Chaos, because they weren't really fleshed out in fantasy tabletop. They deserve some units from Age of Sigmar and or 40k. Now, we've already seen different models used, like the Greater Demons, for instance, from Age of Sigmar. So, again, I think there is no reason we can't bring in Horticulous Slimux. I very much think that Epidemius should be a legendary hero. He would make for the most boring legendary lord. I think he's a great character as a legendary hero. Now, his whole thing is he's the tallyman of Nurgle. He counts up all the diseases mid-battle. He has his little hourglass, and then he has his rune sword. It's all then in a palanquin mount, which we already have the palanquin mount in the game. So he doesn't bring a rotfly, a rot beast, chaos dragon, a Nurgle, a molluscoid, which I'll get to in a second, a plague toad. He doesn't ride anything but the palanquin. That would be pretty boring for a legendary lord. So, Horticulous Slimux, on the other hand, brings a new mount and possible unit in the Molluscoid. Now, the Molluscoid has this area of effect ability in which it might damage units, and then also heal friendly units. So, it would have some kind of Mortis engine, which basically leeches life from enemies, and then gives that health to friendly units. Now, that is a great support piece. Now, on the other hand, it is also a snail, so I think it would be most like the Beast of Nurgle, but it would have better armor. So it might start with, let's say, 60 to 80 armor, and then that gets doubled when it uses this bound ability, which basically is the snail molluscoid shelling up. So it withdraws into its shell. It cannot move anymore, but it doubles its armor. So it goes from 60 to 80 to 120 to 160 armor. Putting that on top of that Mortis engine damage and leech heal type ability would be very, very powerful and quite a unique unit. So if Horticulous Slimux were to not come to Total War, that means we would probably also not get the Molluscoid as a mount or a unit, which I think, personally, would be a damn shame. The Molluscoid would also work as a mount option for Plague Bearer heroes and Heralds of Nurgle Lords. Now, furthermore on Horticulous, he is known as the Grand Cultivator of Nurgle. In other words, he is the prime caretaker of Nurgle's garden, one of Nurgle's probably most prized possession. It's where he grows a lot of disease and life. From time to time, Horticulous will be sent by Nurgle into the space of the Warhammer world, or whatever dimension he so chooses, to fight battles. And Horticulous is none too happy a camper when this happens. He will brutally, and as quickly as a Nurgle character can, kill as many as he can so he can return to tending Nurgle's garden. So as you can see, Horticulous Slimux wields a giant pair of shears, which helps him reach down from the back of Mulch, his unique named molluscoid, and cleave enemies in half or lop off their heads. Now, so that means he literally clips motherfuckers. If that isn't saying he's way more gangster than Epidemius, I don't know what will. I still think Epidemius will make for a necessary and great character, but as a legendary hero, please. He makes so much sense as a Gorda's Backstabber-esque character, and just that all he really brings is that he will support the crap out of your faction and armies. Mostly demonic units, so, well, pretty much entirely demonic units he will buff out. Just like Gorda's buffs hobgoblins, Epidemius will buff Nurglings, plague bearers specifically, and then anything that plague bearers mount, or and then any kind of demonic monsters or beasts of Nurgle, all will get substantial buffs from Epidemius. So that's why I think he makes a great legendary hero. He doesn't bring anything as far as mounts, whereas Horticulous Slimux absolutely does. So I think Horticulous Slimux will lead a Heralds of Chaos DLC for Nurgle. Hopefully, that's my hope. I don't know if it'll happen, but I certainly hope so. I think a Heralds of Chaos DLC will come down the road, and Uzul the Skull Taker will lead Khorne, Blue Scribes will lead Tzeentch, Mask of Slaanesh will lead Slaanesh, and then hopefully Horticulous Slimux leads Nurgle. That's one DLC I see. And then I already showed Tamarkan vs. Elspeth and Grimm. That's another DLC I think will come for Nurgle. The last DLC that I think is necessary for Nurgle is a End Times focused DLC. So the characters that were all part of the same invasion in the End Times were Gutrot, Spume, Glottkin, and the Maggoth Riders. The Maggoth Riders don't make sense as a legendary lord because there's 3 of them. I do think that what they make sense as is pseudo-tech legendary lords. So like the Greenskins get Olglok the Orrible and Rachnik Spiderclaw, and then the Vampire Coast also have some pseudo-legendary lords in their tech tree. I think that's the same way the Maggoth Riders could work. You buy this End Times DLC, and then you get 3 options where, you can buy each of the Maggoth Riders for 5,000 gold or something. Or it could work whereas either for Gutrot or Glottkin's the factions, maybe you could go on quests to unlock the Maggoth Riders. That's another way you could go about it. I personally think that Gutrot Spume is a much more interesting lord to lead a faction than the Glottkin, though I do absolutely see that the Glottkin, why they are a fan favorite, and that they'd be very powerful in battle, both melee and spell casting, and, have some kind of aura. But I think the Glottkin would make most sense as an FLC, because I just don't know what they bring for Legendary Lord's faction. Whereas Gutrot Spume would bring 2 unique mechanics. The first being shipbuilding from the Vampire Coast, albeit remade for a Nurgle lord, and then also monster hunting, possibly from Norska, or maybe it's a monster hunt that mechanic that's built specifically for Gutrot, similar to Emric's dragon taming. Gutrot Spume was the leader of the greatest plague fleet of Nurgle. So he was very much a sailor type lord, so that's where the shipbuilding comes in. He was also known to dive into the Sea of Claws with just a knife to duel krakens underwater, which is Nurgle blessed him with the tentacles after he defeated the kraken. So that's where the monster hunting comes in. He would very much be an anti-large character and focus on hunting monsters down. So kind of think a Nurglite version of maybe Rakarth, or that, I don't know, that's a pretty good, he would probably be a little better at dueling than Rakarth in general, but yeah, a Nurglite character. Glottkin, I just don't know what they would bring. But, you know, I think if we are going to go with any more than 4 legendary lords for the mono gods, which I think 4 is probably a good number for the mono gods as far as legendary lords, but if we were to go over, I think the Glottkin would probably make for a great FLC, just because the Glottkin would bring the same end times units that Gutrot would, such as the Putrid Blight Kings, but more on that in a bit. Now, Fator the Tainted, I've talked about a bit before as Archaon's lieutenant. So I kind of really, well, no, I don't kind of. I definitely feel that CA missed a little bit of the ball as far as reworking Archaon. Specifically in 2 areas, that they didn't give him a unique mechanic similar to Marcus Wulfhart's Hunters, but for Archaon's Lieutenants. I think this is the quintessential mechanic that would have made Archaon feel like the Ever-Chosen. So CA or modders particularly, if you are watching this, please, for the love of God, make this mechanic. And because right now I just don't feel like I want to play Archaon because he doesn't have this. This is the mechanic that I feel would make Archaon feel like the Ever-Chosen. So there's Fator the Tainted for Nurgle, Hargroth the Blooded for Khorne, Melik the Changer for Tzeentch, and Vandred the Majestic for Slaanesh, though Steerkar of the Swordsvanir eventually kills Vandred and becomes Archaon's lieutenant. I think we all want to see Steerkar as a legendary lord, so I think keep Vandred the Majestic for this mechanic. And then for Undivided, there's Crom the Conqueror. Now, they could work as legendary heroes, particularly unlocked through this mechanic, but I think it might be better if they were I think it would be better if they were pseudo-legendary lords unlocked by this mechanic. So yeah, you'd go on a series of about 5 quests, you know, with chaos-themed objectives, and you'd unlock these lords, and then give you some sort of specialities that grant access to possibly unique units, or ancillaries, or bonuses, any of the sort. So Fator the Tainted himself would just probably be an anti-large duelist. So, doesn't really bring anything new to the table. He would just be awesome to see as Archaon's lieutenant in this mechanic, mostly. And then we have Valnir the Reaper. Now, I think Valnir the Reaper, don't get me wrong, he could be a legendary lord, he could be a pseudo-legendary lord. I think he would make best for a legendary hero, specifically kind of like Ulrika, where he works for different races. I think you could have him in the Nurgle race, I think you could have him in Warriors of Chaos, and then potentially even Norska. So he could potentially work for 2 or 3 different races. He would just be an upper echelon duelist for Nurgle. So quickly, wrapping up the characters, I think Tamarkan will absolutely be the Nurgle character for Thrones of Decay DLC. He will help bring in units like Rot Knights and Toad Dragons. Tamarkan himself is a maggot who inhabits bodies and isn't actually the ogre riding on Bubulos. So you might start as a man and then eventually unlock an ogre body, and then after you unlock the ogre body, you would unlock the unique name Toad Dragon Bubulos. And yeah, Bubulos would have a breath attack, he would be pretty fast, but we'll talk more about Toad Dragons later. Now, the Glottkin are a trio of powerful and highly favored servants of the Chaos God Nurgle, Ethrak Glott being a sorcerer with many arcane powers. Gurk Glott was once tall and fair, but he is now a massive swollen monster who carries his siblings to war on his back. And Otto Glott is the oldest of the 3, a powerful warrior wielding a filth-encrusted scythe. For the Maggoth riders, we have Morbidex Twiceborn, who became the avatar of Nurglings. He was engulfed by a horde of Nurglings. They posed riddles to him, pushing him onwards and upwards for correct answers, and transforming parts of him to match them if he was wrong. When he reached the summit of the horde, he had become the avatar of Nurglings. He also wields a giant filth-encrusted scythe. His mount is a large pox Maggoth, just like the other Maggoth riders, but this one is a unique one named Triple Tongue. Now, all of the Pox Maggoths will probably get a shooting attack, but this one would probably have a shorter range kind of burst as the three tongues shoot out in different directions, and would just be good at taking out infantry near him, probably. Orgoth's Demon Spew is the tankiest of the three, and the most warrior-based, whereas Morbid X is more anti-infantry. Orgoth's might be the best duelist. He is a half-demon child of a mortal witch and a great unclean one, giving him advantages, but not being a true demon fills him with bile, cursed never to be able to fully enter the garden of his god. And he carries a pair of rot axes as his unique weapons, and he rides on the Pox Maggoth Whippermaw, who has a much longer tongue than any of the three tongues triple tongue has, and so this might just be a longer range snipe kind of attack. Now, Blobe Rotspawned is the Lord of Demon Flies, so all the putrid Blight Kings are born from the demon flies that come from Blobe Rotspawned. He spreads teeming pestilent life. Through himself, he's made of the flies, and he rides upon the Pox Maggoth Bile Spurter. So a Bile Spurter would have probably one of, if not the most powerful bile attacks in the game. So 3 uses of think of it more like a bile version of the Bale Taurus Breath, where it's kind of multiple shots, and this acidic bile will linger in place and continue to do damage. Then, as I said before, Glottkin and Maggoth Riders would probably become FLC alongside a Gutrot Spume DLC. Gutrot Spume would be an anti-large duelist who would help bring shipbuilding and monster hunting mechanics to a Nurgle faction. Fator the Tainted as an one of Arcane's lieutenants in a mechanic based on that. Valnir the Reaper as a possible legendary hero, as for Warriors of Chaos, Nurgle, and possibly Norsca, and then Epidemius as a Gordas-esque level hero for Nurgle, buffing Plague Bearers. I hope to see all of those are the Nurgle characters I would love to all have in the game before all is said and done. Now let's go through some missing units for Nurgle. When people say that Nurgle is almost done, yes, for 8th edition tabletop, they are almost done, but I certainly think that we should see some crossover, and that there are plenty of units that weren't given rules in tabletop that are loreful to fantasy as well. Now, on this list, there are, I think, only 7 units that are strictly either Age of Sigmar or 40k or both. Yeah, probably both. But, again, Demons of Chaos, they deserve more crossover than any race, as far as bringing in Age of Sigmar or 40k units. I think most other races keep 40k and Age of Sigmar out, but Demons of Chaos, I think, deserve some of those units to fill out their rosters and make them all they can be. So, for infantry, we've seen Poxwalkers in different video games like Chaos Bane and Vermintide and Darktide. They're basically just Nurgle zombies. Just another kind of tar pit unit. Just think zombies with the mark of Nurgle, really. Cultists, I think we could see for every monogod faction. They would just give us a cheap kind of slave tier of unit. We could see cultists with bows, great weapons, spears and shields. All of these might make sense and just give a little bit of utility. We could also see in the cavalry and missile cavalry, we could see cultist horsemen with either spears, shields, or great weapons, and then cultist horse archers. And again, this is just, they'd be slower than most horse archers, but they'd have poison, low missile damage, but give some utility. Then Pestigors and Pestibles. We're seeing the marked Beastmen for every monogod. I think, especially for the Tamarkan DLC, might be a good time. So, Pestigors would most likely come with either great weapons or shields. They should be a variant of Pestigors. So if Pestigors don't get any more variants, then Doesn't make sense to give Mono Gods several variants. So to be different from the Bestigors, I think you would make them with shields, but having great weapons makes sense too. Pestigors really just add a unit, kind of a mid-tier to high infantry that has Vanguard deployment. That's their real key and Woodsman at that. Those two traits in particular are what makes them something worth bringing to the Nurgle roster and the Beastmen roster. Putrid Blight Kings. I went over these in pretty high detail in another video, so check the top right now, and there should be a link there. Now, they could have shields, great weapons, or dual weapons. Essentially, they would just be an aspiring champion of Nurgle. Just use the Putrid Blight Kings model, and in fantasy, you can just rename them to aspiring champions of Nurgle, right? And giving them some type of aura makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I go over that more in this video. Check that out. So then for other cavalry and chariots, Rot Knights are a must, I think. So for, again, looking at the Nurgle Warband upgrades, above the Chaos Knights of Nurgle, there's clearly a missing slot that has to go to the Rot Knights. Now, the Rot Knights might be able to get several variants, maybe a lance, maybe shield and hand weapon, maybe great weapons. Great weapons being my personal favorite because it's Nurgle, but lance or any of the other variants might make sense. Basically, it just gives us monstrous cavalry. I see them as similar to the size of, not Crushers, but Mournfangs from the Ogres. But maybe a slower, but they have the Mark of Nurgle. I think them most like the Mournfang cavalry. Now, the Rot Beast Chariot is basically just we've seen many versions of Nurgle Chariot in models, and through either Beast of Nurgle or Rot Beast or Bounder Beast. And even like a crab type beast. We've seen all sorts of things made out of a chariot. So giving a monstrous chariot that you can upgrade your Chaos Chariot of Nurgle to would be great as well. I think if you can just add that pretty easily if you're already bringing in Rot Knights and Rot Beasts. Which I don't think I actually put Rot Beasts in the Monsters and Beasts category, but yeah, you could just have regular Rot Beasts, like a Feral Pack version. Missile Cav and Monsters, so we already touched upon Cult of Storch Archers, but Bounder Beasts may be a very similar unit to Ancient Salamanders. So if you look at their neck, it very much looks like a like a catapult. You could hawk loogies with that thing pretty easily. I think giving an Ancient Salamander-esque unit, but with poison and acidic damage, would be a huge amount of utility towards the Nurgle roster. It would move at about the speed of Pox Toads, so around 50 or 60 speed. It would bounce around very similarly in its animations, and yeah, I mean, that would be a great unit. And as you see in the other section, Sludge Grubs might be a version of the Bounder Beasts. So if the Bounder Beast is akin to the Ancient Salamander, the Sludge Grubs would be akin to the Salamander Hunting Pack. It would just be a multi-entity version of this mobile artillery piece. So then on to Monsters and Beasts. So Bile Trolls should have at least 3 bound Bile Breath attacks, shooting attacks. I hope it would be a unit of about a dozen, and that one Bile Breath is not very powerful, but 12 streams of Bile Breath is going to be very powerful, which will make the Bile Troll an awesome unit to bring to the game. Plague Ogres, I just imagine as Ogre Bulls with the Mark of Nurgle and a reskin, basically. Poison attacks and so on. Definitely a good unit to bring. Putrid Slugs are, I imagine, in Total War, working like between the Tomb Scorpion of the Tomb Kings and the Mourngulls from the Vampire Coast. So they dig underground and pop back up, kind of like the Tomb Scorpion does, and that is what gives them stock. And they also kind of, in their body structure kind of do look like Morngul's, where they kind of don't look like they have a lower body, and they just pull themselves along with their upper body. So think of it like a Nurgle version of Morngul's, basically, and they might have animations that dip in and out of the ground. So giving a unit with stock, like a monstrous infantry, basically, with stock and some mobility for Nurgle, would be a hugely useful unit to the roster. Pestibles I touched on, they're basically just Minotaurs of Nurgles. And maybe that's what they're called in the game, just like Minotaurs of Khorne for Khorne exist. Basically just Minotaurs of Nurgle, maybe give them a great weapon variant and a shield variant. ToD dragons I touched on before, they'd be pretty speedy, I'd say maybe 70, 80 speed, maybe less, maybe 60, around that range. They'd be huge, like not quite the size of a Dread Saurian, but huge. And they would have breath attack similar to a dragon. Basilisks are not necessarily a Nurgle unit. They're just a Chaos unit in general. They could work in the Beastmen roster. They could work in the Warriors of Chaos roster. They could work in the Nurgle roster. Any of the Mono Gods, possibly. Norska, possibly. I do hope we see Basilisk in some roster, but their abilities are very akin to a Nurgle theme. So it has an aura about it that melts armor and metal. Because it's so acidic and vile, and so that aura, and along with its gaze is not necessarily Nurgle-esque in theme, but it has a gaze ability. And check the top right. I talk more about Basilisk here, but it'd basically just be a direct damage spell is how it would work. Maggoths I already talked about. Maybe they could come as a unit. I think they probably would just work as unique mounts for the Maggoth riders and don't necessarily need to be a unit, but they could make for a pretty friggin' awesome unit. It's an amazing model that I hope to see in Total War, and at least for the Maggoth riders. But, if they did come as a unit, they would probably have a bile attack and would just be a single entity monster. Very good. Molluscoids I talked about before, healing and Mortis Engine tanky beast of Nurgle. Greater spawn of Nurgle, also known as the greater beast of Nurgle. Again, very much like a beast of Nurgle, but would it offer anything much different than, say, a Maggoth or a Molluscoid or any of those units, or ToD Dragon? Probably not, but it just gives us the greater chaos spawn. So the only thing that would really make it different is unbreakable. But Spined Beast of Nurgle. So we've seen artwork for the Chaos Spined Beast. This is basically just a giant mutated warhound. The unit it would act most similar to is a Broodwhore from the Skaven. Chaos Dragon of Nurgle. So it's this artwork right here that makes me really want to have a Chaos Dragon of Nurgle. Just imagine having your Blight Lord, your Lord character mounted on a Chaos Dragon at the head of an armada of rotflies or whatever. I think that would be a just awesome sight. And again, it's just a Chaos Dragon. As I spoke about in my last video, I hope that Chaos Dragons eventually get 2 different bound abilities, 2 different breaths for each head of the Chaos Dragon, because that's how it worked in tabletop. And that would make them a lot cooler in the game. But, yeah, and then it would just have the Mark of Nurgle and might have some kind of cloud of demon flies. Giant of Nurgle, we already have an ROR that is a Giant of Nurgle, so I doubt this will happen, but flavors for giants for the Mono Gods would be cool. Now, a legendary unit is the Puscoil Blight Lords. So, imagine Putrid Blight Kings, so aspiring champion level characters, on top of Ratflies. It would basically be a Nurgle version of the Knights of Torgaval. So think 3 entities, similar stats, but much more health and weapon strength, but generally less melee prowess and stats. So maybe you could only have 1 Puscoil Blight Lord per province, just like the Knights of Torgaval, or maybe they're at the end of the Nurgle Warband tree, and you have to either upgrade your Putrid Blight Kings or your Rot Knights to a Puscoil Blight Lord. is another possibility. Now, in the other section, we have units from 40k or Age of Sigmar, so these are not necessarily fantasy friendly, but I don't see why they couldn't cross over or work. So the Feculent Gnarl Maw is just a kind of landscape piece in tabletop, but I don't see why you couldn't put some little roots along the bottom of the model and just have it crawl along. This unit would possibly have a, kind of like the Molluscoid, a Mortis Engine ability that damages enemies nearby, leeches that health, and then gives that health to friendlies nearby. On top of that, though, the Feculent Gnarl Maw would have summons of Ice Stingers. So Ice Stingers are basically just mosquitoes. It's a swarm version of Rotflies. Very small, kind of mosquito-sized. Think of it like Fellbats, maybe. Fellbats of Nurgle. And they're just mosquitoes. Then we have the Sludge Grubs, which I talked about already. Bloatflies would be basically a flying bloated corpse. So the bloated corpse from the Vampire Coast, think of a flying version of that. Now, so because it is flying, it would be more mobile and would more easily be able to pick its target. The only problem is you wouldn't be able to hide it. That's one of the best ways to get your bloated corpse near the enemy, or your Super Squig near the enemy. That's another unit it's like. So kind of just a different approach on that. And then Curse Mites are just these units that run up on the enemy, latch onto the enemy, and suck their blood until they explode. So maybe, I don't know how they would work in Total War, but that's another idea. And then Lords and Heroes, we just need the other variant that we don't already have. So the Chaos Lord of Nurgle and then the Chaos Sorcerer Hero of Nurgle. We're just missing those, just give us the other variant. And then again, all the Nurgle Beastmen, Shamans, Bulls, and Gore, Lord and Heroes. Just give them the ability to dedicate to any of the monogods, except obviously Khorne Shamans is not a thing. So if I had to pick just 5 of these units for each DLC, I think I would pick, for Tamarkan, Rot Knights, Toad Dragons, Bile Trolls, Pestigores, and Minotaurs of Nurgle. For Gutrot Spume in an End Times focused DLC, we get Glottkin and the Maggoth Riders as FLC, hopefully. Putrid Blight Kings, Buscoil Blight Lords, Maggoths, Putrid Slugs, and Greater Spawns of Nurgle. For a Slimux DLC with the Heralds of Chaos, we would get Molluscoids, Basilisks, Feculent Gnarl Maws, Bounder Beasts, and Bloat Flies. Alright, I think that about covers my thoughts on Nurgle. I will return, so stay tuned with videos, 1 or 2 for the Empire and the same for the Dwarves. There's a lot to cover there, so I might have to branch it out into 2 videos. We'll see how it rolls out. But I thank you guys for joining me today. Again, I had to remake this video because I already pretty much finished it and just realized the quality wasn't there. So hopefully I made the right decision in remaking the whole video, and that you guys appreciate my effort. Thanks again for being here. Like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff, and I hope you guys are doing great in your lives, and we'll check you later. See you next time.